friends, at our recent Let's Get Crafty, we made terrariums. And I got some pictures and videos from some of our friends of the terrariums they made, so check those out. What we made included one plant, but these can totally be scaled up with other plants. Our friends were really super creative with their terrariums. That is one of the steps in self-care that we talked about, especially when we're talking about mental health and how important it is to take care of ourselves, take mental health breaks in our most stressful times. This project also reminded me about how we were talking about self-care at youth group, because what we water in our lives is what grows. So I encourage you to think about how you can water things that bring positivity and joy into your life, instead of spending time and focusing on and watering the things that bring negativity into your life. Okay, let's jump into our project. Let's get crafty. While there are many different combinations of base layers that can be used when making a terrarium, it's important to have a few categories: drainage, nutrients, plant life, and decor. I'll explain why I chose each layer as I go through the tutorial, but here's the supplies that I picked out. A clear container, so I can see what's growing inside. Glass is common, and this one holds about 5 cups of water. It's about 7 inches tall, and the mouth is about 2.5 inches. They can get really expensive, but since I was looking for one that would just hold one plant, I was able to get this one at the dollar store, which made it pretty inexpensive. Size and shape are going to determine how many plants and what kinds of plants. So completely enclosed terrariums aren't necessarily good for cactuses, for example, but an open top and good drainage can make a difference. There are so many different options for containers, such as old glasses or mason jars, vases, fish bowls. So here are some of the other ones that I could have used but chose not to for this particular project. So it's about a little bit taller, didn't have the same bubble, but that would have worked as a taller option. There was the small little fishbowl option. I have a much larger one that I think I might use for a couple of plants later on. And then there are a couple options that would have plants that came out of the top, like this star one and this crystal one, in which case I would be looking at the plants at the top as opposed to looking at the plants through the side. I need about 1 inch or 2 inches of pebbles. The wider the base, the less depth I would need. So for this one with kind of a smaller base, I will probably use about 2 inches worth of pebbles at the bottom. And these ones are just gravel from the hardware store. They're a little sandy, so I could have rinsed them off, but the sand is okay. I also got activated or horticultural charcoal, and just a thin layer of that will be enough. I got orchid bark, and I chose to go with the Miracle Grow orchid potting mix. This is potting soil, and I chose a cactus and succulent potting mix, enough to settle my plant's roots into. It's also based on the preferred look of the container. In this shaped container, I really prefer the balance between the pebbles and the soil to be about even. The plant or plants set, in this case I just chose one plant, but I could have chosen more plants, and I chose one plant based on the size and shape of the container. Or in this case, I wanted one plant, so I got a container based on that. But it could go either way. But really enough, big enough that the plant won't touch the sides or the top if it's kind of more enclosed like this, was important to me. I was able to get a good deal because I was buying these in bulk from a hardware store, but based on your own preference, these can really get more or less expensive depending on what kinds of plants one chooses. Finally, I have some decor here. We got some reindeer moss in some different colors, some pebbles, and these cute little resin dinosaurs. This is the pink one. Garden creatures, fairies, and those kinds of things are fairly popular. And I made sure that when I was picking out the rocks and the dinosaur, that it would be something that could get wet as the plants got watered. So let's put the terrarium together. When putting the terrarium together, I'm really intentional about the different layers. One, because I really like the layered look, but also because each layer does its own special job, especially these pebbles at the bottom, which are going to help drain the water. So we can just put the pebbles right in. Now, if I only had one type of pebble, I would be watching through these pebbles to see if there were any that I liked for up top. But since I already had some polished pebbles, I put them to the side already. Now, these pebbles were one option. Other options include the more polished pebbles like I have here, or if I had some leftover glass beads from making the sun catcher, I might use those. Really, there are lots of options on what can go on the bottom as long as it's going to create good drainage space. So next up is my charcoal. Kind of even out those pebbles first, and the charcoal gets a little messy, so I use a spoon. For this size container, it takes about 5 scoops to get a nice solid layer, and using my spoon or my fork, any tool that you can kind of poke around in there, just enough to get a layer over the rocks. I'm going to choose one more there. And this charcoal layer is important since I wanted the plants to be somewhat enclosed. Using the charcoal helps to keep the water clear of buildup of microorganisms and the air clean for the plant to breathe. It's also going to keep my terrarium from getting smelly, which I know my household members will appreciate. Next, I use the orchid bark planting mix. This is also quick draining, so it's going to help with the plants that need good air movement and the plants that need drier conditions between watering. And again, a solid layer is helpful, but it does not need to be as much as the rocks or the soil. And it's also based on preference. I really like this layered look, which is developing up the side here, but it's all about personal preference. The next layer is the potting soil. This is specifically succulent potting soil formulated for container plants, and it's, again, fast draining. You might see a theme developing here based on the fact that the plants that I have chosen need to drain quickly. So my soil layer is about as thick as my rock layer sitting on top of the orchid bark and the charcoal. If I needed a little more, I have it available. So next up, I will put a divot wherever I want to put my plant. It is easiest to put the biggest plant in first. If there is more than one plant, in this case there's only one, and I'm choosing to put this plant in as close to the middle as possible because of wanting to give it as much space around for air and not possibly touching the edges of the glass. If I was using a prickly plant, I would have gotten some gloves out, but this one is pretty soft. It's also easiest when working with a terrarium that really has a front and a back. This one doesn't because I can see it from all angles, but if I was using a terrarium that kind of laid on its side and had a definite front and back, then it's easiest to work from the back to the front. So I will take my plant out and get its roots so I can see the roots. And then I'm going to settle those roots right into my divot. And then I will use my spoon, actually I kind of like using my fork for this part, to push my dirt back up into any of those spots where that divot is still a little empty, to give it support. And especially with some of the taller plants that I've used in other ones, it's just that it was important to give it a little bit of support. Now I could wait to water this, but since I'm going to add some decorative things in here, I'm just going to add a little bit of water at this point. The goal is to moisten the soil but not overwater it, and I'm trying not to water the actual plant, so not on top of the leaves of the plant, but more the soil around it. And especially as it gets situated to this new environment, I'm going to give it a little bit of extra water right now. Typically, the soil just needs to look a little damp, and then really it's just every 2 weeks or so to add some water when it starts to look dried out. Too much water for succulents is bad. Terrarium will also need some sunlight, so putting it on a windowsill or somewhere else where it can receive bright indirect sunlight is good. So the only thing that is left is to add my decor. So I will put in some of this reindeer moss, which comes in a whole host of colors. I have kind of a green and a pink and a blue-gray here, but they make all sorts of colors from it. And this is all personal preference. There's no real right or wrong. And using my tools, where I got a little reindeer moss caught in my plant, I can just move my moss around, play with it until I'm content. Put some of those polished pebbles in there. I saw in a couple of our friends who made their own terrariums at Let's Get Crafty, they did not have room for all of the moss that we had, and that is okay. Or they did not have room for the dinosaur because their moss was very all-encompassing. And I'm going to do in this one a ring of pebbles around, and then the moss on the outside of the pebbles, because these pebbles are very pretty. And pop my dinosaur right in there. And there it is. This is a pretty simple terrarium project. It does not take long to put together, and will bring a little bit of easy to maintain plant life into my home. So here's another look at those layers: the pebbles, charcoal, bark, soil, plants, and decor. Thanks for joining us for another Let's Get Crafty demo. I hope these terrariums bring a little bit of joy into your space and remind you to water positive things in your life. Bye, friends.